The Wizards ultimately don't stand completely pat at the deadline, but they make one move that was kind of unexpected. Daniel Gafford, of all people, winds up getting traded. Gafford gets moved for a first-rounder in Rashawn Holmes. Pretty good return. He then promptly scores 16 and grabs 17 boards against the Wizards the other night in Dallas's win. As Kyle Kuzma said afterwards, that dude's got the easiest job in the world right now. Just wait for Luka to get doubled, run towards the rim, and know that he'll find you, and then grab every rebound available. But I think a lot of Wizards fans were upset because Tyus Jones, Delon Wright, Kyle Kuzma, amongst others, don't get traded. And we learned from Josh Robbins in The Athletic that, in fact, there was a deal on the table for Kuzma, that the Wizards go to Kuzma and are like, hey, like, we'll do this, but we're not, like, it's kind of your choice on this. Yeah. It's not like a blow us out of the water deal. And Kuz was like, no, I'd rather stay. So are you in that group of, like, what are they doing? Or do you like the attempts at chess that this office or this front office is playing?
I like the way you put it, right? It feels like there's a little bit of chess going on. The Kuzma thing, just to add a little bit more to Josh's reporting, and I obviously talked to Josh about this as well. As late as, like, Wednesday night, like into the wee hours of Wednesday night, they had a deal on the table with Dallas to send Kuzma there, and I believe that's probably when that conversation ended up happening, and they decided to pivot the next morning. The big question mark, though, is, like you just mentioned, you still got Tyus Jones on the roster, who's going to be a free agent this summer. You still got Delon Wright on the roster, who's going to be a free agent this summer. It makes me kind of scratch my head a little bit as to, like, why they didn't move off of those dudes. In Tyus's case, and I'm sure you've hit on this already, Craig, I think he's highly regarded throughout the league that there's a big sign-and-trade potential there to where maybe you get better picks than you're getting right now at the deadline. But I don't know, man. We were talking about it during the break. I just feel like Tyus being on the roster, not so much Delon, Shamet as well, like, they're taking shots away from dudes. And, like, that's more of my thing, especially with the emergence of Corey Kispert and Deni Avdija here over this last, like, month and a half, 2-month stretch. Like, those guys need the ball in their hands more. And I understand the conversation of Tyus being a tremendous setup man and, like, having gravity to get these guys shots. But at some point, I think we need to, like, maybe revisit the discussion as to what the ceiling is for Deni Avdija and Corey Kispert, because I think we look at them as, like, fringe starter rotational players. Corey Kispert may be a starter in this league on a championship team. Deni Avdija may be a starter in this league on a championship team. I think you're getting a lot of good stuff out of them now, but imagine if they had a little bit more freedom on the offensive side of the ball to really show who they could, eventually develop into.
So you just hit on a couple of things there that I think are interesting. First is that, let me just work in reverse order. Deni and Corey are 4th or 5th starters at max on a championship team. And when you're the 4th or 5th starter, that doesn't mean that you need more opportunity. You need to learn how to become a star in that role, right? Like, so opening it up and saying, like, hey, guys, be even the second best player.
You feel that way?
I don't feel like if Deni Avdija is taking 18 shots a night for you, you're not going to win a championship. And so Deni needs to understand on a championship team. I think now that doesn't mean that during the regular season he can't have nights like that. But like playoffs, like what is his optimal role? I think he devotes most of his energy to the defensive end. He gets out and runs and gets you easy buckets in transition. He can handle the ball a little bit, but like in the half court, I'm not putting the ball in his hands. I would love to see him continue to develop that part of his game. I think he should work on that. But the idea that, like, this dude needs more shots. He needs to be a featured part of the offense so that we can figure out what he is. And it's like, you think he could be a second best player on a championship team? Because if not, why are you giving him a bunch of half-court possessions, right? So that's part of it. And I think Corey is a guy, like, I think Corey's ultimate style is someone like a JJ Redick, who you actually do run a lot of offense for, but you run it in part because of his gravity and his constant motion that creates things and opportunities for others. He's very, very smart. He can attack off the dribble. Like, his numbers are tremendous from an efficiency standpoint this year. To the point that I wonder if he could be a huge, like, if I was the Lakers, like, I would probably give up a first-round pick for Corey Kispert.
Yeah, you got to.
So that's the kind of thing that I think we need to think about. But here's the analogy that I'll use when it comes to Bilal, when it comes to these other guys. When you're baking a cake, how much baking do you do, Leno?
Not much, Craig.
Okay.
I like cookies.
But here's, okay, so we can bake cookies instead. And if the recipe says bake at 400 for 20 minutes, we know that if we try to bake it 800 for 10 minutes, it's not going to work.
Right.
And that is what a lot of fans, I feel like, want to do when it comes to player development. Is you got to get him shots. You got to get him more opportunities, more looks, more with the ball in his hands, more this, more that, more minutes. And it's like, you're just trying to burn the kid out?
Yeah.
Because you can't take a recipe that says bake it 400 for 20 minutes, find an oven that goes to 800. Those don't really exist outside of, like, I don't know, like open fire.
Yeah.
But 800 degrees and cook it for 10 and expect to get a perfectly done cookie. These things take time. Player development takes time, and it takes ramping up the opportunities and the experiences at a certain pace and level to maximize the player. I know there's a lot of numbers talking about usage rates at young age for some of the best players in the league, especially when they were teenagers. But like a lot of these guys, they had the usage rate because they were that great. You don't develop into that.
Right.
And I think that's where people get twisted with some of the numbers is they have their cause and their effect backwards.
I agree with what you're saying. I think an increased usage, though, for Deni specifically, I'm curious to see what the outcome is, because the jump he's made from last year to this year, to me, is so sizable that you have to wonder, is he just now starting to get it and we're going to see another leap like that this offseason? Because another thing about it that we kind of like omit is his jump has also come with Bradley Beal not being here. More shots. And the contract that he signed this offseason, when you talk to him, he constantly is talking about the confidence that came with that contract, and you can see it when he plays. I'm to the point where with him, it's like, I'm not saying he's a point guard, and the Luka Doncic comparisons were crazy coming out of his draft, but like,
right,
I could see him being a guy that starts for you and then is maybe your lead play initiator with the second unit. So I do agree ultimately what you're saying. They're probably like fourth and fifth starters on championship teams. But Deni is like, he's still young enough. The shot has taken a tremendous step forward. Like,
huge step forward. I mean, he's shooting 39% from three.
It's nuts, Craig. Like, in the attempts, obviously, you want to see those go up so we know if this is real or if he's just doing it in a limited sample size. But that's kind of my argument for getting them more opportunities. I don't think it would hurt them.
So, I mean, Denny's now 23 years old, and we talk about this massive leap. And he has. He's 4 points per game. His rebounding numbers are actually exactly the same. Like, even offensive, defensive rebound splits are exactly the same from last year per game. And then his assist number has jumped to 1 per game this year.
The transition points is the big thing, and it's kind of like an analytic.
And as a result, by the way, his field goal percentage has gone from 43% to 52% from the field. And another huge part of that is he's taking a little bit less from three, but he's getting much higher quality and making them at a much higher percentage. As he is 39.2% from three.
When you read that, it makes me smile, bro.
Yeah, for sure. And I like, to be clear, I think Deni Avdija is a really good player. I'm really happy for Deni. He seems like a great kid. I've really enjoyed talking to him at all times. And he's doing this, by the way, in a season where I can't imagine what he's going through mentally, considering what's happening in Israel.
That's why you're the man for bringing that up.
His homeland. He's got friends and family that he's worried about all the time.
Constantly.
But with all of that said, like, we're talking about a guy that's averaging 13-6, 13-6-4. Like, we're not talking about a guy who's all of a sudden averaging 18 a game. And I feel like sometimes that's the way the discussion goes. And it's like, no, he's averaging 13, which is fine. But, like, if he gets to 15 a game, I'm psyched. That's who I want him to be, is a 15-point, 7 rebound, 4 assists, shoot it really well from three, be reliable. But, like, that's your third at best, but probably fourth or fifth starter. Or I think optimally, like true optimization for Deni Avdija on a championship team, he's the sixth or seventh guy. Maybe closes games.
Maybe finishes because of the defensive ability, right?
For sure. I think that's very possible. But I do think that he's 4 to 7, not 1 to 3.
No, and I wasn't saying that. I just.
But there's might not have been, but you know Wiz Twitter.
Wiz Twitter's a cesspool, Craig.
A lot of people that
I don't know how we're doing on time. I can't believe we've gone this deep into basketball season, and you're a basketball junkie like myself. What do you think about Jordan, who I'll on the record say, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying this, I've gotten to gain a little bit of a rapport with him and trying to understand him as a person and relative to a basketball player, because I think the mental psyche of everything that's happening with him.
Well, before you get too deep, do you have time to do one more segment?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
All right, let's do one more segment on that next. That also gives me a chance during this commercial break to furiously pull comments for Never Read the Comments. We'll talk about Poole, because I talked about this with Robbins for a while yesterday, and I'm curious to dive into it with you. We'll talk about Poole next on the Wizards front, and then Never Read the Comments at 5:45 here on the Team 98. Continuing our conversation on the Wizards, and Linnell, I know that you have made it a point when you go cover games, which you do. You go out to Capital One and try to get in the locker room. Not try to get in, like you try as in you make the effort, not as like he fights his way in. He's got a credential, people, don't worry. But you've talked to Jordan Poole quite a bit this year, and I think that his place on this team is obviously pretty important. It's pretty fascinating, and I think opinions are obviously, they range not from like, oh, it's great, to like, it's a disaster. It's a disaster. We all know that. It's just like, where in the range of disaster is it? How fixable is it? And how big of a problem is it for the Wizards?
It's a problem because they have 9 wins to this point, and like, he was supposed to be a lot better. I remember the convos we were having when the trade initially went down. I was stamping him most improved player candidate, penciling him in for 25 points a night. It just hasn't been that, and I think it's been like that for a couple of different reasons. Just from a basketball standpoint, you go from being the 3rd or 4th option in Golden State to now being the number 1 option on opposing team scouting reports. He's had to adjust to that. I think there's a mental part of it that he's had to overcome. Being in a new city, he's a kid that grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Like, he's not a big city kid. I don't even know if the city was Milwaukee. He grew up in Wisconsin. It's not a big city kid. This is probably new to him. Like, Jordan is a pretty quiet, reserved person. The one thing being on Twitter, and it's not just Wizards Twitter, which we admit is like a toxic cesspool, even like national outlets in their coverage of Jordan, it's kind of felt like they're out to get my man. And I'm not trying to seem like I'm like trying to vouch for Jordan, but some of it's unfair. If we're just looking at it from just a pure basketball standpoint, he's inefficient, not playing well.
No, there's like no way to defend the basketball.
No way to defend the basketball.
It's impossible.
Him as a person, though, I think that's what I'm kind of getting irritated with, hearing some of the negative things that people have to say about him, because getting to talk to him on a pretty regular basis, like, he's a very down-to-earth dude that is also pretty like aware of what's happening. There's no one that wants to get out of this slump that Jordan Poole is in more than Jordan. That's what I think gets lost with all of this. But for him moving forward and like how it affects the Wizards, like we were talking about it off air, Craig, the contract that he has isn't bad. I think he's like the 49th highest paid player in basketball right now, which is like,
yes, I think he's actually
50th. So like, that's not bad at all. To me, I think, and tell me what you think about this, Craig, I feel like he's being used wrong. I want to see Jordan on the ball more, being an initiator in high screen and roll action. Like, that's who he is.
I would say that is definitely something that at times he feels very uninvolved, and I think that is a huge part of it. Where you're just like, can you get on the ball? Yeah. But I don't know how much of that is Wes and then Brian Keefe versus does Jordan need to be more assertive? And this is my question with Jordan. And this is like, if I got to sit down with him, I think the conversation that I would like to have, like, I don't know whether I would even ask this if it was over the phone. Like, it would be like, hey, man, I want to sit face to face so that you see I can do this with a level of humanity that is not me, like, questioning your place as an NBA basketball player. But, like, I'm really just trying to understand. Is, like, when you watch yourself on film, what do you see? Right? Because that's the thing that I think is hard with Jordan. And I think where other players, when you see people, making jokes around the league or whatever, and like also where people even side with Draymond, where it's like, well, look at Jordan. And it's like, look at Draymond and how he competes versus the way Jordan does. And to be very clear, what Draymond did is unconscionable. Yeah. And Draymond would, by the way, say that and has said that. He has apologized for the way that all went down. Point is, when you watch Jordan Poole play basketball, it doesn't match the description of the character that you hear about behind the scenes. And that, to me, has always been the biggest disconnect, and I don't know what to make of it. And it's why I ask you about it as someone who's been in that locker room. It's why I asked Robbins about it. If people want to check that out, make sure you go check the podcast feed to hear what Josh had to say about kind of this disconnect of this very good person who's been great off the floor, who the organization loves, and this player who often just looks like he doesn't care. And again, the key word is there are looks like. It looks like he doesn't care. Like, watch Jordan Poole play defense. And if I'm Jordan Poole watching myself play defense, I'm going, did I expect that to work? Right? Like, there's this disconnect where I'm like, I've heard how maniacal this dude's work ethic is, how great of a guy he is. And he gets out there and he just has this disposition and demeanor of someone who is not engaged and is not willing to fight to do what it takes to win. I do think it has been better since Brian Keefe has gotten here.
Him and the rest of the roster, for that matter, Craig, and I'm glad you brought that up. I think they needed a new voice. They're fighting over screens harder. They're just playing harder.
Right. There's like an effort to stay in front
of
people on the defensive end. And then it becomes also like offensively, we watch the intensity with which Corey Kispert plays. And I use that word intentionally because it's like, oh, he runs around screens and like, yeah, of course he does. He's a great shooter. But it's like anybody could do the movement part.
Right.
And like, and I've talked to Corey about this multiple times where it's like and I talked to Wes about this back in the day and he's like, yeah, no, you're correct. And I'm like, thank you. I'm glad that when I'm watching, I see things on some kind of level that is truth. But like when you play basketball and someone runs into your area, you also have to move.
Right.
And so there's a spacing element to when Corey is running around and like cutting and playing hard and doing these things, he forces others to get involved in a way that they don't, where it's very stagnant when he's not on the floor. And I do think like Jordan has that ability too. And it's part of what makes Steph. Like the ultimate version of this is Steph Curry because he draws so much attention. And I've always put, now I'm getting super philosophical in a basketball sense, not like in a life sense. I think everyone can follow along this. But like defense is solving a math problem. Right? And it's a bunch of individual equations. And Leno, if I ask you, this is not a trick question. Please, for the love of God, don't overthink it. What is 1 + 1?
2.
+ 1?
3.
+ 1?
4.
And if I start all of a sudden going +1, +1, +1, +1, it all of a sudden becomes a lot harder to track. Right. Because one switch of a screen is easy.
Correct.
2 is hard. Now, all of a sudden, I've got a split cut. Now I've got this. By the way, what coverage? Are we icing? Are we sending the sideline? Like, that rapidity of decision making is what makes defense in the NBA really hard. And when you're stagnant, it's really easy to make individual decisions for help to be in the right place. And that is where I think someone like Jordan could be a lot more active offensively to put pressure on defenses in the same way that Corey does, in the same way that Steph does in Golden State, and some of the best players in the league do.
I agree with you 100%. And like I give you your flowers, bro. Like you said it perfectly. For a guy that is so loved in the locker room and people rave about the work ethic and what type of dude he is, I'm going to call it straight up. And I've said this to Jordan. Like sometimes it looks like he's loafing out there.
Right.
But like these are pro players. Like of course they're not loafing.
Right. 100%.
It's hard to watch. And I think especially when you have a young, impressionable team like the Wizards, you can't put bad stuff on tape consistently. Which is why I think what you said is spot on. Like, I would love to, like, have a sit-down convo to where it's, like, off the record and he could, like, evaluate himself. Because I think if he
I would
watches
love
himself,
to watch tape with Jordan
there's just
Poole
no way you're
and
going
just
to
be
tell
like,
me that
hey.
that's acceptable. Even some of the shot attempts. And the shot attempts I'm a little bit more lenient on, Craig, because as you highlighted, if you're going to be taking 30-foot three-pointers, you better be in the gym taking 30-foot three-pointers after practice. And by all accounts, like that is Jordan. Jordan was a gym rat this summer.
Yeah, he's a creative shot taker and creative shot maker. Yes. It hasn't gone particularly great this year, but like that is essentially
that's what he do.
I think the other thing too, and I know we're running out of time here, but like the other thing that I think is a mystery that I would love to like get Winger or Dawkins or someone to talk about, or Keefe, frankly, as a player development guy, is like if he doesn't have the athleticism, the twitchiness that he seemed to have 2 years ago. And he didn't really have it last year in Golden State either. So like, where did that go? What happened? And maybe he's just not 21 anymore. And like the twitchiness you have, like we see this with NFL running backs. They could still be explosive players, but like they lose like this twitchiness that a college athlete has. And maybe that's Jordan's just like in his mid-20s now, and that's gone. But like
it's just
figuring
hard to
out
think,
how to
Craig.
get that back.
Like if you watched fans on Twitter did like a montage of his best buckets. He just looks night and day from that guy.
Yeah.
And
it's wild.
It's hard for me to wrap my head around.
Yeah,
it.
I
think he'll turn it around.
I really hope he does turn it around. If he doesn't, though, I think it's important to remember the cap is going up.
Yeah.
Jordan Poole's cap hit will cap out in year 4 at like $34 million.
Not that
and in
bad.
that year, like Dame or LeBron, if they're still around by then, will be making like 78. I'm not kidding. That's like the real number. So, or somewhere in that range. Yeah. So, like a $30 million contract. $1 million a year contract, which is not remotely in terms of percentage of the cap what it used to be.
What you're saying is me and you should have worked on our jumpers a little bit longer when we were kids.
I don't think that my jumper would have been enough, Linnell.
But your jumper's not the problem though, because you could actually stroke it. I give you that.
I can shoot it all right, not NBA all right, but I can shoot it all right. Yeah, the athleticism piece is
it's huge,
tremendously missing in the scope of NBA athleticism.
Hey, this is DA, and you're listening to The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.